You are alive right now because of a decision one man made at 3 in the morning. He wasn't a president. He wasn't a general. He wasn't even senior enough to be in most history books. He was a mid-level Soviet military officer, sitting alone in a bunker, staring at a screen, with 4 minutes to decide whether humanity would survive the night. His name was Stanislav Petrov, and the decision he made, a decision that directly violated his orders, his training, and the entire doctrine of the most powerful military machine in human history, is the reason you are breathing right now. This is not a metaphor. This is not an exaggeration built for drama. The chain of events that Stanislav Petrov interrupted on the night of September 26th, 1983 would, according to every credible analysis done since, have led to a full-scale nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and the United States. The kind that ends civilization. The kind that kills hundreds of millions of people in the first wave and billions more in the years that follow. He stopped it, alone, at 3 in the morning, with nothing but his gut, and his government punished him for it. Let that land for a moment. The man who saved 7 billion lives was punished for saving 7 billion lives, and when he died in 2017, almost no one came to his funeral. That is the story we are telling today. To understand what Stanislav Petrov did, you first have to understand the world he was living in. Because 1983 was not like any other year of the Cold War. 1983 was the year the Cold War almost stopped being cold. The relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union had deteriorated to a level that genuinely alarmed people on both sides. Ronald Reagan had just called the Soviet Union an evil empire in a speech that sent shockwaves through Moscow. The United States had announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, what the media called Star Wars, a missile defense system that Soviet military planners believed was not defensive at all, but offensive. If America could shoot down Soviet missiles, then America could launch a first strike without fear of retaliation. That was the Soviet calculation. That was the fear. And then on September the 1st, 1983, just weeks before the night we're talking about, a Soviet jet shot down Korean Airlines Flight 7th, 269 civilians died. The world erupted. Reagan called it a crime against humanity. Soviet leaders, already paranoid, became convinced that the West was preparing for war, possibly using the outrage over the airliner as justification. In Moscow, in the highest levels of Soviet military and intelligence, there was a genuine, sincere belief that the United States might launch a nuclear first strike. Not someday, soon. The KGB launched Operation Ryan, the largest peacetime intelligence operation in Soviet history, specifically to detect signs of an incoming American nuclear attack. Soviet forces were placed on elevated alert. Early warning systems were being watched with an intensity that had never existed before. This is the world Stanislav Petrov walked into when he reported for duty on the night of September 25th, going into September 26, 1983. He was a lieutenant colonel. He was 44 years old. He was not supposed to be on duty that night. He was filling in for a colleague. His job as duty officer at Serpukhov 15, the Soviet Early Warning Center outside Moscow, was to monitor satellite data and report anything unusual to his superiors. The protocol was clear. If the system detected incoming American missiles, he was to report it immediately. What happened next was not his decision. His superiors would verify, inform the General Staff, and the General Staff would inform the Soviet leadership. Given the alert level, given the political climate, given everything, the prevailing assumption among Soviet analysts was that if the system confirmed an American launch, the Soviet response would be swift and total. His job was not to think. His job was to report. At 12:15 in the morning, the alarm went off. The sound that filled Bunker Serpukhov 15 in that moment is something Petrov would describe for the rest of his life. He called it a scream. Not a beep, not a tone, not an alert. A scream. Every light on the board blazed. The screens showed a single word in large red letters that had never appeared there in peacetime. Launch. One American intercontinental ballistic missile had been detected. The satellite data was clear. An ICBM launched from American soil, trajectory confirmed, impact zone, Soviet Union. The protocol was clear. Report immediately. Petrov did not pick up the phone. He stared at the screen. His training told him to report. His orders told him to report. The doctrine of the entire Soviet military establishment, built over 40 years of Cold War paranoia and preparedness, told him to report. Every man in that bunker, the soldiers, the technicians, the subordinates who were watching their duty officer with wide eyes, they were all watching him, waiting for him to pick up the phone. He didn't pick up the phone because something in his mind had snagged on a detail that didn't fit. One missile. Why would the United States launch one missile? If America was going to launch a first strike, if this was the beginning of the end of the world, they wouldn't send one missile. They would send everything. Hundreds of ICBMs, thousands of warheads. You do not start a nuclear war with one missile. You do not give your enemy time to respond, time to scramble, time to counter-launch. If you're going to do it, you do everything at once. You do it immediately. You do it with overwhelming force. One missile made no strategic sense. And then it got worse. While Petrov was still processing that thought, the system escalated. The single launch warning became 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. 5 missiles. 5 American ICBMs detected, launched, confirmed, incoming. The alarm was still screaming. The red letters were still blazing. The clock was running. Petrov had, if the warnings were real, approximately 4 minutes before impact. His subordinates were looking at him. Some of them were shouting. The protocol was unambiguous. There was only one thing he was supposed to do. He still didn't pick up the phone. What happened in Stanislav Petrov's mind in the next few minutes is one of the most extraordinary cognitive performances in human history. And it happened under conditions of stress that most human beings will never come close to experiencing. He was working through a problem in real time, with his heart pounding and his hands shaking and the alarm still screaming in his ears. And the problem was this: is this real? The data said yes. The system was unambiguous. 5 missiles detected, trajectories confirmed, impact imminent. But Petrov had something the data didn't have: knowledge of the system's weaknesses. He knew that the Soviet early warning satellite network, the OCO system, had problems. He knew it wasn't perfect. He knew there had been false alarms before, though never anything at this scale. He knew the system could, under specific conditions, misinterpret natural phenomena as missile launches. High-altitude sunlight reflecting off the tops of clouds at certain angles. Atmospheric anomalies. Specific geometric alignments between satellites and the sun and the Earth's surface. And he thought 5 missiles is an unusual number. Too few for a real strike. Too many for a random glitch. Unless the system had detected one phenomenon and then amplified it. Unless what the system was calling 5 missiles was actually one thing, misread 5 times. He also noticed, and this detail matters enormously, that the ground-based radar systems, which were independent of the satellite network, had not confirmed the launch. For a real strike, you would expect multiple systems to be screaming simultaneously. The satellites were screaming. The ground radar was silent. Discrepancy. That discrepancy was thin. It was not proof. It was not even close to certainty. It was a single data point that pointed, maybe, possibly, in the direction of a malfunction. Stanislav Petrov had a choice between two kinds of terrible. If he reported and the warnings were real, the Soviet leadership would have the information they needed to respond before impact. Protocol fulfilled. His job done. If the missiles were real and he didn't report, hundreds of millions of Soviets would die without even knowing what hit them, and it would be his fault. If he reported and the warnings were false, the Soviet military machine, already on maximum alert, already convinced a first strike was possible, might respond to a non-existent attack with a very real counter-launch. In which case, the nuclear war he was supposed to prevent was now being caused by the very protocol designed to prevent it. 7 billion people and his decision and a malfunctioning satellite. He decided. He picked up the phone, but not the phone to his superiors. He called the duty officer at Soviet Army headquarters, and he said the words that may be the most consequential sentence ever spoken in a military facility on this planet. "I am reporting a false alarm." The minutes that followed were among the most agonizing of his life. Because here is the thing, he wasn't certain. He would say later, in interviews with characteristic bluntness, that he was not certain. He was perhaps 50% sure, maybe 60. He had made a judgment call in 4 minutes under maximum stress based on incomplete information that went against every protocol he had been trained to follow. And now he had to wait. If the missiles were real, he would know in a few minutes. There would be impacts. There would be fire. There would be nothing, because there wouldn't be anything anymore. He sat in the bunker. The alarm was still screaming. He made a note in his log, false alarm. His subordinates were still watching him. Some of them thought he had just ended his career. Some of them thought he had just ended the world. The minutes passed. No impact. The alarm eventually quieted. Soviet engineers went to work analyzing the data. They found the answer within hours. The Oko satellite had been in an unusual orbital position. Sunlight at a very specific angle had reflected off the tops of high-altitude clouds over the American Midwest. The satellite's sensors had read those reflections as missile plumes. The algorithm had flagged them as launches. One event amplified into 5 warnings by a cascade of software failures. The system had screamed the end of the world. The world had not ended. Stanislav Petrov had been right. Now, here is where the story turns from extraordinary to devastating. You would expect, wouldn't you, that what came next was recognition. Medals, public gratitude. At minimum, a quiet acknowledgement from the Soviet government that this man had just prevented the most catastrophic event in human history through a combination of knowledge, judgment, and extraordinary personal courage. That is not what happened. What happened was an investigation. Because Stanislav Petrov had violated protocol. His log, the log he had kept so carefully in the most terrifying 4 minutes of his life, was incomplete. In the chaos of those minutes, filling out a report and managing his team and keeping the system functioning and wrestling with the decision that would determine whether humanity survived the night, he had not filled out the paperwork correctly. He was investigated for dereliction of duty. He was not court-martialed, partly because the investigation found no wrongdoing serious enough to justify prosecution, and partly because the Soviet military had a powerful interest in this story not becoming widely known. Publicly acknowledging the false alarm would mean publicly acknowledging that the entire Soviet early warning system had nearly triggered a nuclear war by misreading reflected sunlight. That was embarrassing. That was something you buried. So instead of being punished formally, Petrov was quietly removed. He received no medal, no commendation, no official recognition. He was transferred to a less significant post. The stress of the investigation and the event had taken a severe toll on his health. Not long after, he retired from the military, citing a nervous breakdown. He went home to his apartment in Fryazevo, a small town outside Moscow. He took care of his wife, who was gravely ill with cancer. When she died, he lived alone. He survived on a pension that was barely enough. For years, he told almost no one about what had happened. The Soviet government had not disclosed the incident. There was no public record. As far as the world knew, the night of September 26th, 1983 was just another night of the Cold War. One man, alone in a small apartment, knew that it wasn't. The world only learned what Stanislav Petrov had done when the Soviet Union collapsed and classified files began to be released in the 1990s. A Soviet general who had been aware of the incident wrote about it in his memoirs. The story caught the attention of journalists. Eventually, Petrov himself began to speak publicly. He did not speak like a hero. He was uncomfortable with the word. When people called him the man who saved the world, he would shrug and say something characteristically deflating. "I was just doing my job." Or he would say that he had a 50-50 chance of being right, and that calling something heroic when it was essentially a coin flip felt dishonest. But then he would also say things that revealed just how much that night had cost him. He would say that he had not slept well for years afterward, that the weight of having been the single point of failure, the single human judgment standing between the world and its own destruction, was not something that sat lightly, that he had replayed those 4 minutes more times than he could count. In 2006, the Association of World Citizens gave him a World Citizen Award and a check for $1,000. When a documentary filmmaker asked him what he did with the money, he said he drank it. He meant that literally. The ceremony was overwhelming, and he spent the evening in his hotel room with a bottle. In 2013, he received the Dresden Peace Prize. He gave a speech. He was frail by then. He died on May 19, 2017, in his apartment in Fryazevo. He was 77 years old. His neighbor discovered he had died. His son, who lived in another city, had been trying to call him. No one had checked on him for several days. When the news spread through the international community, through the journalists and documentary filmmakers and peace activists who had spent years trying to bring his story to wider attention, there was an outpouring of tributes. Newspapers ran pieces. Social media carried the news. At his actual funeral, in his actual town, in Russia, almost no one came. There is a question that has stayed with me since I first read about Stanislav Petrov. It is not the question you might expect. It is not, how did he have the courage? It is not, why didn't his government treat him better? The question is this: how many times has this happened without us knowing? How many times in the long, cold decades of superpower rivalry did everything come down to one person, one moment, one decision, one human being who could have gone either way? How many officers in silos in Montana and bunkers in Siberia held the thread of civilization in their hands and, because they were tired or scared or well-trained or simply lucky, made the choice that let morning come? We know about Petrov now. We know about Vasily Arkhipov, the Soviet naval officer who in 1962 refused to authorize a nuclear torpedo launch during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a refusal that required his specific approval under Soviet protocol. We know about these people because the records eventually surfaced. But the Cold War lasted 40 years. The systems were imperfect from the beginning, and both sides knew it. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which was supposed to make nuclear war unthinkable, also created the conditions where any glitch in any system could trigger the very catastrophe it was meant to prevent. We survived it. Most historians and defense analysts who study the period will quietly tell you that surviving it was, in no small part, a matter of luck. Not just policy, not just deterrence, not just rational actors making rational decisions. Luck. And the moments that luck took human form were moments like September 26, 1983, when a 44-year-old Soviet officer looked at a screaming alarm and decided, for reasons he could not fully articulate at the time, that the world was not ending tonight. He was right, and the world went to sleep not knowing. Here is what I want you to take from this. History books are full of generals and presidents and kings. They are full of the people who gave the orders, signed the treaties, built the weapons, started the wars. The infrastructure of power is visible. The records exist. The names are preserved. But the actual hinge points of history, the moments when everything that came before and everything that came after balanced on a single decision. Those moments very often happened in places we weren't looking. In bunkers, in submarines, in cramped monitoring stations at 3 in the morning, where a person no one had heard of and no one would remember made a choice that the world would never know about. Stanislav Petrov was one of those people, and we were lucky, extraordinarily lucky, that he was the one who happened to be sitting in that chair when the alarm went off. We were lucky that he knew enough to doubt the system. We were lucky that he trusted his own judgment over his orders. We were lucky that he was willing to bear the consequences of being wrong. Because if he had been wrong, if those missiles had been real, the consequences would have been his to carry for however many minutes remained. We were lucky that a man we had never heard of, in a place we had never seen, in the middle of the night, on a shift he wasn't even supposed to be working, was the kind of person who asked, "Does this make sense?" He asked that question. He got the right answer. We got to wake up the next morning. That is the thing about the hidden machinery of history. The names we know are often not the names that mattered most. The moments we study are often not the moments that were most dangerous. And the people who actually saved us, who stood at the place where the thread came closest to breaking and held it together through nothing but judgment and nerve, those people often went home to quiet apartments and lived out their years in the ordinary anonymity they had always occupied. Stanislav Petrov sat in a room we never visited. He made a decision we never knew about. He saved a world that never thanked him. And then he died alone. Next time someone tells you that ordinary people don't change history, remember September 26, 1983. Remember the man in the bunker. Remember the screaming alarm. Remember the 4 minutes. Remember that you are here